Alrighty, guys, we have made it to Captain America Brave New World. We have made it to, I don't even know what MCU movie we're on, but I know that for me, in my own personal rankings in terms of the live action movies and shows and special presentations, we are on project number 48. It's crazy to think how fast and how big the MCU expanded, probably for the worse in some cases, but regardless, here we are. So, this is going to be my non-spoiler and spoiler review of Captain America Brave New World. So, as always, I'm going to be starting out with the non-spoiler section. So if you have not seen Captain America Brave New World, no worries. Feel free to stay on. Feel free to listen. I will not be spoiling anything that you have not seen in the main trailer. So sorry about it if you had avoided the fact that Red Hulk was in this movie. He's been in pretty much every single piece of marketing that this movie has been in. I'm going to be talking at least what we've seen in the trailers about Red Hulk and my thoughts on him in the movie and other things that we've seen in those trailers. But other than that, no spoilers at all for this movie, and then I will be very clearly delineating when we will be diving into the spoiler section, so no worries there as well, and we'll be, making it very clear, and you can feel free to hop off if you haven't seen the film and come back to the segment or the podcast once you have. So, here we go, Captain America Brave New World. Before we get into my thoughts on the film, it's important to note that there has been a lot said about this movie. There's been a lot of rumblings, a lot of context, a lot of different things going on, because, this film has seemingly had one of the more troubled productions in MCU history. We don't know. I think it's fair to say we don't know exactly what happened. There are a lot of rumors. There are a lot of reports. I think it's very important to emphasize that these are all speculation and rumors. I think what is clear is that this film did undergo some changes. I think that much is clear. The extent to which those changes, how big they were. And I think, for example, I think it's pretty clear and pretty obvious that Giancarlo Esposito was inserted into the film, I would say somewhere around the 3/4 mark or the halfway point of production, somewhere after that. So that's an example of a pretty significant change. But other things like, they reshot the entire 90% of the film and all that kind of stuff, I don't know. I don't believe that personally. But again, I think there will be a lot of postmortems done and we'll see what comes of that. So this film went through a lot of, production troubles, I would say. But we don't know the extent to which that was going on. The other thing to note here is that this is a film that is following up a television series in the MCU, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which I would wager to say not a lot of people who watch Captain America Brave New World have seen. And that is what it is. It's just part of the strategy that Marvel is employing by having these TV shows come out now. It's the same thing that they did, going from WandaVision to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. It is what it is, right? I happen to think, before seeing this film, I said this before in other various podcasts and segments, that, I think Falcon and the Winter Soldier stood to benefit more from just having a TV show, in terms of the fact that you actually probably didn't need to watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but you could have gone from the Endgame scene where the old Cap, Steve Rogers, handed the new Cap, Falcon, Sam Wilson, the shield, and then you could have gone from that to Captain America Brave New World. Because I think, as we get into my thoughts on the film, that some of the complaints that people have had about the film is that there are some redundancies, but a lot of those redundancies are redundancies from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, right? So a lot of these plot points and beats are replaying themselves in in Captain America: Brave New World. But I think it's because Marvel kind of felt pigeonholed to have to explain to audiences who had not seen the Falcon and the Winter Soldier some of the things that were going on. For example, there are some scenes where Sam is still struggling to take up the mantle of Captain America. And you would have figured, sure, we had a whole series about this. But, there are people who haven't seen the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and they just went straight from Endgame. So you got to kind of bake that in. Stuff with Isaiah Bradley, right? Isaiah Bradley is a character who is entirely in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier and nowhere else before in the MCU. And his character is here, and I think if you didn't watch the show, you'd get a pretty decent idea of who he was. You might not have any idea why Danny Ramirez is playing Joaquin Torres, a new Falcon, but then again, Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson just kind of came out of nowhere, and I say came out of nowhere. He was introduced in the Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and he was fine. So, I think that's fine as well. There are other MCU connections, obviously, in this film, such as the, giant thing sticking out of the Indian Ocean, right? What could that be? And all the implications that come with that particular plot point, as well as all the returning characters from other MCU movies, most notably, of course, being Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. So, I think this movie, had a lot of uphill battles to climb, and of course just reestablishing Captain America as a brand, both in the real world and both in the MCU, and of course reestablishing that Sam Wilson is now Captain America as well. So there are a lot of things going into the film. Now, let me dive into some of the things that I really enjoyed about Captain America: Brave New World, and some things I didn't enjoy. But before we get to that, just some overall thoughts. I'll just give my overall thought on the film. I think it's okay. I think it's actually decent, is what I would say. And maybe, I was thinking about this after I watched the film. this film probably stands to honestly get a little worse as rewatches happen, right? Because one of the things that I liked the most on the first watch that I think will actually diminish its value in future viewings is the fact that there is a lot of intrigue in this movie. There's been a lot said about that, about said intrigue that, it's not done as well and it's kind of, not leading anywhere, et cetera, et cetera. I actually thought it was probably one of the stronger parts of the movie, the political intrigue and the back and forth and things like that. I actually think that certain elements of the story and a good chunk of at least what they were going for in the story were really strong. I'm a person who really likes, and I'm going to say this in not capital P politics, but lowercase p politics, in movies. And what I mean by that is, for example, a show like The West Wing, or even just The Winter Soldier, for example, a political thriller, right? I really enjoy political back and forths where different things are happening across the world and treaties are happening and there are fights over territories and, what's going to happen to the world and you're the president of the United States, his actions have consequences. I really enjoy that kind of thing in movies and television shows. So that part of this movie was there, a lot of the stuff going on because one of the main characters of this movie is the president of the United States, and he, played by Harrison Ford, he does a lot of things that have consequences, right, throughout the movie and across the world. And I think that a lot of the things that they were doing in that regard actually worked really well for me. It clicked a lot better, I think, in the second act. And once you kind of start seeing what's happening, all the puzzle pieces are being laid out and the plan is being set into motion, you're like, oh, okay, really interesting that this led to this and this was meaning to lead to this and there were characters going through here and going through there and now it's all kind of culminating in this and this and this and it leads to the third act. So I was like, okay, I think that's really, really solid. And I think that a lot of those things were good. In terms of the cast, right? In terms of the cast, Anthony Mackie, I think, is really good, really solid as Sam Wilson, Captain America. I don't know if he was given the best material to work with in this film, but I think for what he was given, he does a good job. And, one of the things I said in my predictions and hopes segment that I did last week in the episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod is that at the end of this movie, I really hoped that I would believe Sam Wilson could lead the Avengers. And I think it's hard because I don't know how, even in the best case scenario of this movie, that you could come out of it, saying, I believe 100% that Sam Wilson could lead the Avengers. And I think that has less to do with Sam Wilson as a character and Anthony Mackie as an actor, and more the fact that we just haven't seen any iteration of this new Avengers team come together. Right? We haven't even seen characters like Shang-Chi and Moon Knight and She-Hulk or whatever characters they're going to put into the Avengers. We haven't even seen them, again, since their original introduction into the MCU. So for any character, I don't care, Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, it would have been hard and it would be a little strange to see all these characters together and have a leader. But I will say that at the end of this film, I was bought into the idea that Sam Wilson is a leader and he's going to do a great job in Doomsday and Secret Wars or whatever they're going to do there and have him be a strong leader in the Avengers. Other characters, I think Danny Ramirez as Joaquin Torres / New Falcon is okay. I can see potential in him to grow, into the role. I think this movie, because again, I mean, you guys got to remember some of the characters in the MCU were not the strongest in their first appearances as supporting characters. For example, I think that Scarlett Johansson really grew into the role of Black Widow. I don't think she was the strongest character in Iron Man 2. I think Anthony Mackie is an exception. I think he was pretty strong in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. But other characters, I think that it takes time for some of these characters, and so I'm willing to give Joaquin Torres a little bit of a pass. But yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, some of the scenes that he was in this movie were a little goofy and a little bit not uninteresting, but certain parts of his character in this movie were interesting, but then they just kind of didn't know what to do with him in certain other parts. Harrison Ford is great. He is given the most to do, I would say, out of any character. I think that's true, and I think he does a great job with it. I think that he is playing the president well, but he's also playing kind of a tortured character with a lot of baggage on his shoulders, and I think that that's really interesting. And of course, the elephant in the room, I don't know how much of it he was doing, but I mean, Red Hulk was good. Like I said, I've been skeptical of the idea of a Red Hulk since basically I first kind of realized that's where they were going, and they've been setting up this character, let's be honest, since he came back in Civil War. I mean, just some of the things they were saying there. So I was skeptical of it even back then. But look, I mean, for being a skeptic, I'm pretty sold after this movie. I was like, yeah, okay, I see it. And the CGI, by the way, for Red Hulk, really good. I mean, you've seen it in the trailers. You've seen little bits and pieces. It's good. It's really good. Other characters, Giancarlo Esposito. I'm not. I mean, we did a segment revealing who his character was, but for those of you who don't know, because they didn't reveal it in the trailers, I'm not going to say it was good. And he's always an intimidating presence, but he wasn't in the movie that much. There's another, there are a couple other supporting characters that I thought were pretty good, pretty interesting as well. And I think that's pretty much it. You got you got Cap, you got Harrison Ford, and other characters are kind of jumping in and out of the movie. So I think that the cast for the most part was pretty good. I think really though, jumping into now things that I didn't like as much about the movie. I think that the story. So the concepts in the story, right? The political elements, because I do like some of the things that they're doing here. And I do like the way that they integrate other parts of the MCU into this movie, for example. And there are villains that come in that you remember from other parts of the MCU, and there are other characters that you remember that come in from other parts of the MCU, and other concepts, I should say, that come in from other parts of the MCU, while also setting up things that will come into the future. Obviously the giant mass in the middle of the Indian Ocean, that's been something from the MCU that will play a part in the future. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, from other trailers that it wasn't really highlighted in the main trailer. So I'm not really going to talk about it. But yeah, I mean, those things were interesting, right? Like I mentioned, the political angles were really interesting. I think the structure of the story, though, or the pacing of the story, I think the first act was really bumpy, actually. The first act, we're getting our footing. We're being introduced to a lot of things, and things are just kind of happening, And then I think the second act does a lot to connect those things together. And so you're starting to understand, okay, all right, I see where we're going. And actually, the beginning of the third act was really solid, really, really solid. And then I think the movie just abruptly kind of cuts off its momentum at the very end, because I'll talk more about this in the spoiler section, but I think a few scenes at the very end and a few scenes at the very beginning, or even cutting some things down in the very beginning, would have really streamlined the story a lot better. There's a couple things. There are a couple things. One character in particular that I think needed some more time, needed some more space in this movie. This movie is 1 hour and 58 minutes, and we don't want all of our movies to be over 2 hours if they don't need to be, but I think this movie could have benefited from maybe 10 more minutes from another character here and another side character there, and I think it would have really helped a lot. I think that some people have been complaining that the dialogue and exposition is really obvious and really heavy-handed. I think there are scenes where that's true. There are a couple scenes where you're like, okay, you guys are just talking, and we need to kind of move on here. There are a couple scenes that I think were really good. There's a conversation in particular between Sam Wilson and Thunderbolt Ross that I really liked, and I think a lot of the conversations between the characters, are in service of kind of explaining and grounding the movie into what's happening, right, in terms of the intrigue and the politics that are going on in this movie. So I thought that was good, honestly. I didn't have a ton of complaints. Like, I wasn't listening to the movie and going, cringe, the dialogue is just awful. Again, there are some scenes where I'm like, yeah, it could have been a little bit better. But, overall, I wasn't too dissatisfied about that angle of the movie. I just think overall, when you look at Captain America Brave New World, as we wrap up my non-spoiler thoughts, it could have been better. And I think that that's something, maybe that's unfair to say, because we want to judge all the movies that we watch on their own merits. I do think it could have been better, for sure. I think that it could have been tightened up, and then you could have added those extra minutes to another character here. Like I mentioned, a very specific angle that I want to talk about more in the spoiler discussion. And I do think that some of the parts were a little bit slow and a little bit, uninteresting. But I think overall, the story had enough there to keep me entertained. This is by no means, I think, a bad movie. While I don't think it's necessarily even a good movie, it's like, but by good, I just mean, like every facet is good and it's competent and all that kind of stuff. I think it's decent. I think decent is the word that I would give the movie. It's not great. It's not bad. I think it's decent, And I think that at the end of the day, you have some really good stuff going on with Sam Wilson as Captain America. He's being able to lead his troops into battle, if you will, metaphorically. And I think that the story, I think, wraps up and culminates in such a way where you go, okay, I understand where this was going. And I liked a decent amount of what they were doing with it on screen, the execution, because again, it's one thing to do concept well, but not execution. And so I think that a decent amount of it, I was like, yeah, I get it. I understand where we're going, and let's see what happens here. So look, Captain America Brave New World, not my favorite MCU movie. Certainly, not going to be in the upper half, I don't think. But I don't think it's it's terrible. I don't. And maybe that's not something that it's not the praise that the MCU wants right now. And I do think Thunderbolts and I do think Fantastic Four are going to be great. But this movie, I think it had enough good in there where I go, yeah, I enjoyed my time there. So those are my non-spoiler thoughts on Captain America Brave New World. But let's get into my spoiler thoughts here really quickly before we wrap up the segment and wrap up the podcast. So if you have not seen Captain America Brave New World, make sure to just, save this segment for later and come back to the podcast or this segment once you have seen the movie. I hope that was enough time to stall, and let's get into the spoiler discussion. So I want to address the third act part that I was talking about earlier. This was one of the first things that I thought about after the movie was over. I liked the lead up, right? I really liked, because I was a little worried. We'd heard reports, and I'd heard reports that Red Hulk wasn't even in the movie for that long. And I was like, okay, well, he's being pushed in all the marketing, so it better be worth it. And I do think it was worth it. I think that the lead up going into the final battle in DC was good, because you're like, okay, it's building. You see the rage building up in Harrison Ford, and it's like, okay, we're getting somewhere. And then once he breaks out, you're like, yes, okay, I get it now. He's the nuclear option, and the leader really wants to see, or wants the world to see, Harrison Ford's Red Hulk, Thaddeus Ross is, who he really is, right? Just a monster. That's all great. The thing about the way the movie ended, though, and it was really abrupt for me, because, I think the whole idea of Sam Wilson talking Red Hulk down, and that's all fine. I almost thought that Betty Ross was going to show up there, just like how Lois Lane showed up for Superman in the Justice League theatrical cut, and Superman kind of calms down there. I think, that's kind of what I thought was going to happen, but it didn't. Sam Wilson was talking him down. That's fine. It's good. I think that was fine. I think, though, my realization was, after that happened, after Harrison Ford transforms back into Harrison Ford, I thought, okay, now we got to confront the leader, right? Because, to me, Red Hulk is not the villain of this movie. He's not the antagonist. He is the nuclear option. He is the disruptor of the movie, right? He's sort of the thing that is going to explode at any point, the ticking time bomb, if you will. But the leader is the villain of the movie. And when he got himself captured at the very end, I was like, okay, let's see what happens here. Fully expecting there to be another confrontation, between Sam Wilson and the leader or something else. Like, it was almost setting up the this idea that, okay, leader's going to get himself captured, and then he's going to break himself out, and then there's going to be a final confrontation. I'm not saying physically, just, whether it's them talking or something is going to happen. Like one final act from the leader that will end the film. And it just kind of ended. So that was something that I was like, oh, interesting, disappointing there. And I think it made the ending feel very abrupt for me. The beginning also, again, just a little bit bumpy there. I think that the stuff in general, like clips, if you were to watch clips of this on YouTube of him fighting, the Serpent Society and stuff like that, it's fine, it's good. But I think that it's not until the second act, once you start realizing, okay, so they were being set up to go to Mexico, then they were being set up to bring Isaiah Bradley into the White House, and then, Isaiah didn't kill President Ross, and he was sent to prison, and then, all these different things about the treaty falling apart. Like, that's when the stuff got interesting to me, because that kind of stuff reminds me of episodes of The West Wing, for example, the political intrigue, the back and forth between different nations, between the US and Japan, and all that kind of stuff. That's really good. That stuff really works for me. So I enjoyed that very, very much. Other characters that I didn't mention in my non-spoiler review, Tim Blake Nelson as the leader, design was okay. I don't know how you pull off that look from the comics in live action. He has just a crazy looking head. So they opted for a little bit of a different route. They didn't opt for the light bulb, bulbous, really, really bulbous head as in the comics. And I think it's fine. I don't think they needed to adapt it really one-to-one, in my personal opinion. And it looks fine. His performance was good. I liked him. He wasn't in the movie that much, and I wish he was more. Like I said, I think, I was alluding to maybe adding 10 more minutes somewhere with another character, and it was this character, the leader. I think we really needed more time with this villain that could have elevated him from being kind of a forgettable villain at the end of the day, to being, something that is really good, like a manipulator, a mastermind. And I just don't think that that's really what, that's not really what happened. And I think that that's a little bit disappointing there. The other character I didn't really talk about was Ruth, the Black Widow agent. And look, I know I'm paying attention to these kinds of things. There was a lot of controversy around this character. I'm not here to talk about it on this YouTube channel. That's not really what we're here to do. You can go check out any other, resource, any other news website. They're all going to be talking about this and from many different angles and whatnot. I'm just here to talk about the character herself. And I found the character a little bit annoying at first, but actually kind of warmed up to her as a character. I think that her relationship with Sam Wilson and Joaquin Torres was decent towards the latter half of the film, where she actually got on board with everything. You know, I think it was good. I think the character grew on me as the movie went on. Again, we are not here to talk about all the other stuff. You can totally have all your opinions about this character and about, you know, all the different things. That's all I'm going to say about the character Ruth. So anyways, moving on from there. Yeah, I think overall, look, it's not a perfect movie. I like the stuff on Tiamat Island or Celestial Island or whatever. Adamantium kind of just became a MacGuffin, and I think it's interesting enough. And obviously, if you're a Marvel fan, you know that Adamantium will eventually lead to Wolverine and all that kind of stuff. So they didn't really talk about it that much unless I missed a big Easter egg, which I probably did. I probably missed a bunch of big Easter eggs there. But, you know, and Serpent Society didn't really do anything. It was very clear that Giancarlo Esposito was just kind of shoehorned in there. And I like Giancarlo Esposito, but, you know, it makes me wonder, man, I mean, Sidewinder of all characters? I don't know. Maybe Sidewinder is going to be a huge villain in the Daredevil Spider-Man movie or whatever. Probably not, but I mean, here's hoping, right? Because he's kept alive. And speaking of kept alive, the post-credit scene was a big nothing burger. It's just Samuel Stearns saying, "Oh, multiverse," you know, and then stay tuned. I actually really thought at the end of the movie he was going to say, you know, they're coming, you know, Doom. I thought he was going to say Doctor Doom's coming, and he said others, and I was like, okay, that's a little bit lame. He could have said Doom, and we all would have been like, oh, okay, Doom is coming. I think it's interesting now, though, and maybe this is something we'll talk about in future episodes, maybe in next week's episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod, where we're assembling a very odd collection of characters in the raft, you know. Zemo is there. Lest you forget, Zemo is in the raft. We just didn't see him because probably Daniel Brühl wasn't available to show up. But, you know, Zemo is there, and now we have Stearns there, and we have a Red Hulk in there. We actually have people who could have ostensibly been in the Thunderbolts. And by the way, Thunderbolts, we'll talk about Bucky in just a second, but Thunderbolts, I mean, Thunderbolt Ross is alive, and after everything that happened there, one has to imagine there is some distinct connection between, you know, the name, the Thunderbolts, and Thunderbolt Ross, right? There has to be. It's just crazy that there wouldn't be a connection there. So we'll see how that plays out. I told you guys, pivoting to Bucky, I told you guys, it's on record, I told you guys Bucky would show up, and sure enough, Bucky showed up. I knew it just made too much sense, and I even said there, you know, there's probably some connection there between him running for Congress, being in DC, and him showing up in the movie, and sure enough, Bucky shows up, which I think was, yeah, it was good to see him, really good to see him. Like I said, there are some redundancies in the movie. That conversation was one of them, where Sam is like, I don't know if I can do it. You know, I don't know if Steve picked the wrong person. They had that exact same conversation in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, honestly. But I get it, because, you know, for people who hadn't seen the TV show, I get it. I mean, you got to rehash some of the things. So, you know, there is that. Yeah, the Red Hulk Captain America fight was good. The action over the Celestial Island was good. Again, story was a bit choppy. Some of the dialogue, you know, some like Sam Wilson just driving a car and being on the phone with Joaquin Torres, it's a little choppy, it's a little strange. And I also said earlier on in the non-spoiler section that, yeah, I think this movie might not hold up as well on rewatches, because now that the intrigue of, okay, you know, who's pulling the strings and what's going on with each nation and stuff, where you can really scrutinize the story now on rewatch, I'm worried that this movie will be probably much less enjoyable on the rewatch, but we'll get there when we get there, when we do our Phase 5 rewatch, hopefully sometime soon. So I think that's about it, guys, for in terms of, I guess the other big thing with this movie is that they're definitely setting up Sam Wilson to be recruiting new Avengers now. That'll probably be happening either in the background or probably at the very beginning of Doomsday, which, to be honest with you, they kept talking about it. They kept talking, we need the Avengers, we need the Avengers, we need the Avengers, and nothing came of it. I almost was thinking, okay, so the post-credit scene kind of has to be, you know, Sam, or at the end of the movie even has to be Sam calling maybe Bruce and being like, hey, Bruce, what's up? You know, I just fought Thunderbolt Ross for you, or not for you, but, you know, he was obviously involved with Thunderbolt Ross at one point. So yeah, that's interesting. Also, Liv Tyler showed up. We saw set photos of Liv Tyler at some kind of funeral. So again, just, you know, going to the fact that this movie changed through production, but she just shows up at the end for one very quick scene, and then she's in a phone call. But yeah, I mean, I almost thought Sam Wilson was just gonna, you know, was gonna start recruiting Avengers at the end of this movie or in the post-credit scene, but nope, looks like that's gonna be saved for Doomsday, and we'll see what happens there. So again, you know, like I said at the beginning, or like I said during the non-spoiler review, Captain America: Brave New World, it's not perfect. I wouldn't even call it particularly amazing. I wouldn't call it great. I would struggle to call it good, but I would call it decent. You know, I think like a half a notch below good. I think that there's enough to like in this movie. It's messy. and there are definitely parts that I don't love, but I do think that the political intrigue angle and the different things with Red Hulk and all the different kinds of manipulations that are going on with the leader and whatnot really kept me engaged for the most part throughout the movie. And I mean, it's not in the top half of the MCU, and I do think the MCU is only going to go up from here in 2025 with Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four and their movies, and then we got Doomsday, Spider-Man 4, so we got some good movies coming up, but hopefully at least, so I'm looking forward to that. But guys, what did you think about Captain America Brave New World? Did you like the movie, or did you not like the movie? I think the critics are pretty split, and the audiences seem to be generally enjoying it, so yeah, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below.